So welcome everybody, especially those who are joining us for the first time. You may have seen the YouTube videos of the first session. So welcome to you in a special way. And to all the others who have been joining with us from the last session, welcome to you too. So as we said, we're talking about a journey of revisiting our roots, and it's giving us a chance to encounter Chiara and this charism of unity that has been unfolding through her through the decades. This is one way of celebrating Chiara in this anniversary year. It's also doing us good because we're discovering where we come from and meet many protagonists along with Chiara, whom God called to this life of unity. They answered generously, and he used them to respond to the needs and challenges of their time with the gift of the charism of unity. Like them, we too have been called to unity and to respond to the needs and challenges today. I think it's not by chance all of us are connected today here on this for this session, because all of us in some way have encountered the charism. So we hope that with these sessions, we understand better our calling and respond so that we too can carry on Chiara's legacy. The method that we are using is are from clips from a program that was done at the 60th anniversary of the movement, which was divided into decades, 40s, 50s, so on. These sessions will open some windows. We cannot exhaust everything because the movement is very vast. At every session, we'll give you a context of what was happening in the church, in the world, in that period of time, to help you grasp the working of the Holy Spirit through this charism then and now. It's a team effort, and also there are different people who will present. Last session, we walked through the 40s. So maybe we'll ask Vinay, in a few words, can you recap what we did in the 40s?
Sure. Thanks, Dhoni, and good evening and welcome to everyone once again. And really happy to be here with you in the second session of the unfolding of the charism of the movement. As Dhoni said, we already in our first session covered quite a few interesting aspects. In fact, we started with the history of the movement. For some of us who were there present, and for those who were not, it would be interesting to know. And then we took you through a journey. You know, we all went through the journey of the life of the movement, starting from the 40s, where we showcased key events and different developments that took place both in the world, particularly in Europe, and of course in the life of the church during that period as well. There were different developments that happened in the church, and then of course we correlated all of that to the life and the history of the movement during that period. In fact, many of us may know and recall that it was in this period, that was in the year 43, 1943, that the movement was also born and the ideal was sown in the heart of Chiara, and just then spread far and wide and is now all over the world. We also spoke about Chiara's experience at the house of Loreto. And this was one of her first really close encounters with understanding the ideal. And in fact, she had gone to attend the convention of Catholic students, and she left from there, and her life changed completely from then onwards. Chiara said a yes to God, and from there we went on to start and experience this life of the ideal and of unity with some of her close friends who also wanted to do the same. We also spoke about the life and the calling of some of the first companions of Chiara. So we also spoke about, for example, Natalia and her choice of God. We also spoke about Vale and how she was able to listen to that voice within her and experience God. And we also spoke about Marco, one of the first companions, and his experience of understanding and experiencing Jesus in our midst. And then, of course, we spoke a little bit about the life of Igino Giordani, who's also known among all of us and popularly known as Foco, who was and is considered one of the co-founders of the movement today. And then, of course, we went on to we also had experiences of their calling to this life of the movement that was shared by Vivek and Nisha, and also about Jesus Forsaken and as our one spouse that was presented by Andrea. And so very quickly, we've tried to cover a lot of what happened during that 1.5 hour. There was so much more, but with that as a background, we thought we wanted to take you on this journey ahead, no, to be able to understand and experience in a more deeper way the charism of the movement. And so I
Yes,
ask Sherlan to take us
thank
through
you.
what's in store for us today. Over to
Yes,
you.
so today we will meet a few other protagonists. Another folk co-founder, Chiaretto. We will see the birth of other vocations like the Focolarino priest, Focolare families, the volunteers, the movement that begins to concretize in human realities. We'll see the birth of the Mariapolises and the Focolare that crosses the oceans to go to other continents. As usual, we will start with a short background of what was happening in the 50s in the world, in the church, and in the movement. So over to you, Yuta.
So let's continue also today our walk through history. This time, we are looking into the 50s and we want to recall together what happened in the world and in the church while the Focolare movement was coming to life. At the beginning of the decade, the world finds itself in the midst of the Cold War. Clashes between communism and capitalism dominate the decade. The conflicts begin with the Korean War in 1950. In Europe, we see France, Italy, and Germany starting the journey of a united Europe with the aim of ending the frequent and bloody wars between neighbors, which had culminated in the Second World War. As of 1950, the European coal and steel community begins. The Focolare movement, officially the work of Mary, has already been approved in Trent. From 1951 onwards, the Focolare is being studied by the Church of Rome. A very trying period begins for Chiara and her followers. Yet, it is Pope Pius XII who entrusts to Chiara the red zones of Italy, meaning the communist areas, referring especially to Emilia-Romagna and Tuscany region. 1954 is marked by a landmark decision by the Supreme Court in the United States. Racial segregation in public schools is outlawed in a unanimous decision of the Supreme Court and declared as inherently unequal and therefore against the American Constitution. The clashes between black and white begin and shake the world. While Chiara and her followers on one side are living in great uncertainties about whether being approved or not by the Catholic Church, on the other side, it is a time of grace and flourishing. The movement, in fact, advances and blossoms into new branches for priests, religious, and so on. However, the atmosphere among the Catholic bishops in Italy is not greatly in favor of the movement. In this bracket of time falls also the first contact with the Jesuit priest who has escaped from behind the Iron Curtains, meaning countries under Russian domination. He urges Chiara to bring the charism of unity to those countries, and a delicate collaboration begins. Countries in Africa and Asia starting the process of decolonization, and with it we see various countries becoming independent in 1956. This process is accelerated in the following decade. At the end of 1956, we witness a very important event happening with the Hungarian Revolution. Although Khrushchev, then leader of the Soviet Union, had denounced Stalin at the 20th Party Conference that year and launches the de-Stalinization, the events in Hungary, however, make clear that Russia was not prepared to allow a Soviet satellite state to break away from Soviet control. The Hungarian uprising and its consequences were unacceptable to the Soviet Union. The Soviets, therefore, invaded with their tanks the country and crushed the uprising with force. The hopes and dreams of freedom of the Hungarian people came to a bloody end. The whole world stopped dead in its tracks, barely believing what was happening. In this tumultuous climate, the Holy Father made a heart-rendering appeal on Vatican Radio in response to the events in Hungary, calling out for a multitude of volunteers ready to give witness to God. His appeal was then echoed in Chiara's response, which gave birth to the adventure of the men and women volunteers of God, lay people who are committed to bringing God into their workplace and into all areas of society. The process of unification among European countries continues, and with the Treaty of Rome in 1957, the European Economic Communion, or Common Market, was created. This is the beginning of what we know now as the European Union. With the launch of Sputnik 1 by the Soviet Union, sending the first man-made satellite into orbit around the Earth, the space race between the US and Russia begins, and this adds on to the Cold War and the struggle over dominance in the world. In 1957, Chiara has her first contacts with personalities of the ecclesiastical and political world. The innovation of the charism conquers, attracts, and also puzzles many people. The movement, however, advances unrestrained and for the first time crosses the borders of Europe. In 1959, the Cuban Revolution comes to an end, with Fidel Castro rising to power. For the first time, a country in the Western Hemisphere falls under a communist regime. We're coming to the end of the decade, and we see with the papacy of Pope John XXIII in 1958, a new era in the history of the Catholic Church being inaugurated. With the convocation of the Second Vatican Council in 1959, Pope John XXIII wanted to give way to a new Pentecost, a new outpouring of the Holy Spirit. He was in fact the first Pope since the Reformation who acknowledged frankly that Catholicism stood in need of reinvigoration and reform. So this is the decade we are dealing with today. Let's take a closer look now at the developments that gave shape to the work of Mary in those years.
So in our last session, we introduced you to Igino Giordani of Foco, a person humanly and spiritually prepared by God to work alongside Chiara. A person who in just the first 30 minutes of his meeting with Chiara in Rome understood that this 28-year-old had a great charism from God, which was for the church and for humanity. For his tremendous insight and contribution to the movement, Chiara recognized him as one of the co-founders of the movement. The process of his beatification is also underway. And now we present to you yet another important figure who is also considered by Chiara a co-founder, Pasquale Ferresi. So in 1949, one of Foco's colleagues from the parliament, Palmiro Ferresi, who is Pasquale Ferresi's father, invited Chiara for a meeting among the elite of the Italian Catholic laity. Unable to go, she sent one of her first companions, Graziella. Unfortunately, because of a mix-up of the date, Graziella arrived a day after the event and went directly to Ferresi's home, where she found no one except his son, Pasquale, who had recently left the seminary and was beginning to distance himself from the church. He had heard something about this movement, but wasn't particularly impressed. Now, since Graziella had come all the way, out of courtesy and hospitality, he struck a conversation with her, asking what she and the others were doing, expecting to hear about good works with the orphans, with the handicapped. "We live according to the model of the Holy Trinity," replied Graziella. To this, he was taken aback. He almost looked around to see if anyone was listening to them. From the way she expressed herself, he could tell that these young women were not just living words, but a reality. As he asked her for more questions, he saw that she was speaking of the gospel with the same simplicity that he had found in the gospel. In fact, it was this simplicity that was in contrast with certain notions and realities in the seminary and in the ecclesial world of that time that had provoked a deep crisis in him and had caused him to abandon the idea of becoming a priest. He then asked Graziella about her relationship with the Eucharist. We go to communion every day. If it were possible, we would go twice a day, she said. And with this, Pasquale understood that this movement was completely embedded in the church. He soon met Chiara and decided to enter the Focolare. In the clip that will follow, we will hear about this meeting of his with Chiara. But just to tell you that later, Chiara wanted Pasquale to also continue his priestly studies. And this was also his desire because in contact with the movement, the zeal was once again started in his heart. In 1954, Pasquale Foresi became the first Focolarino to be ordained a priest, paving the way for men Focolarini who also feel the call to priesthood at the service of the movement and living in perfect communion with other Focolarini. Thus, Father Foresi, or Chiaretto, a name given by Chiara, which means a little Chiara, because she saw in him great potential. He was an important contributor to the concretization of the charism of unity in human realities, like the publishing activities. In this clip, he speaks about Città Nuova, the first newsletter, which corresponds to Living City for us in India. His role was important also in the birth of the mini-cities of the movement, like Lopiano. Also for the movement's theological studies. For those of you who are doing the UPM course, we have to be grateful to Chiaretto. The drafting of the statutes, etc. Later, Chiaretto also served as co-president of the movement for many years and had an important part in the contact between the movement and the church authorities. So let's hear Chiaretto or Father Foresi, who after the impactful meeting with Graziella, went to Trent to meet Chiara.
When I met the movement from Graziella at Pistoia, a small city of Italy, during the first days of December 1949, I did not immediately think of becoming a Focolarino. I don't even remember Graziella speaking to me about this. A few days afterwards, I was invited to go to Trent for the last days of the year, where I would learn more about this wonderful life. I left on the evening of December 26th. That evening, when I arrived, I was met by Marco, the first Focolarino. I went to the men's Focolare, and so I learned that it was possible for me to become a Focolarino. I felt immediately attracted by this, and I thought that, since in Focolare there was the life of Jesus in the midst, if I became a Focolarino, I would always live in a high and supernatural atmosphere. In fact, I had experienced, like many others, that when participating in spiritual exercises for young people, at the very end of every spiritual exercise, I would make resolutions. But after 10, 15 days, everything returned as it was before. Knowing Jesus in the midst in the Focolare, I told myself, in this spirituality, one can never go backwards, because I no longer live with my resolutions, but with brothers, and we help one another to go to God without ever stopping. It was already the beginning of my vocation to the Focolare. The encounter with Chiara that morning of December 31st dazzled me. Listening to her speak, one could understand that she was a soul completely filled with God. Chiara won me over immediately with her light and above all with her holiness. I had never found anyone on earth who was so limpid and so spiritual. When she spoke about the graces she had received in 1949, resolving some questions I had with regard to philosophy and theology, I was really overwhelmed.
At the end of 1949, there was the meeting with Chiaretto and the beginning of the incarnation, that is, the concretization of the movement.
The first achievement was the Città Nuova periodical, which began on a small scale. In 1956, I prepared the first issue of Città Nuova, duplicating about 200 copies. The magazine was born. It was my first achievement with respect to incarnating the ideal.
Okay, for today, I think we introduced to you a couple, Danilo and Anna Maria, who are also very instrumental, especially from the point of view of families. Now, Danilo and Anna Maria were one of the first Focolare family. Now, since this is a new word that some of you may be hearing, I will just briefly speak to you about what is the Focolare family. The Focolare family is one where both husband and wife have committed to live the ideal of unity. That is, both husband and wife are married Focolari. Okay, from this clip you will see how they actually also took a great leap for a married couple and all, and lived in obedience to the will of God and to their vocation as married Focolari. They were responsible for the families, as what we understand, as new families, for many decades. And they currently live in Rome and continue to be, to all of us, really a living testimony of the ideal. And they carry with them, of course, this rich history of all the experiences they encountered with Chiara, and are really an inspiration to those who meet them. Years of their journey in living this charism of unity.
We are Danilo and Anna Maria. Danilo came in contact with the ideal in the spring of 1950 with the first Focolarini of Milan. We got married shortly afterwards. During those years, the vocation of the married Focolarino had emerged from Foco. It was customary at that time for the married Focolarini and Focolarine to come to Rome every year, and Chiara and Foco were with us. In one of these meetings, it was Easter, 1956, the married Focolarini of Trent had given Chiara a cuckoo clock as a gift. Chiara was happy, very happy, and she told us, "You married Popey, in your Focolare, be like that cuckoo, and repeat with your life, what counts is love, what counts is love, what counts is love." There were years in which, together with many graces of the foundation, the Lord was also training us. He trained us to live according to the gospel, to set up our life in accordance with the gospel, in accordance with the Word of God, both individually and as a family. Also to be open to every neighbor, rich or poor, and to cut, therefore, with a certain traditional way of living, which was rather bourgeois. In 1955, we received a letter from Dori. She had had lunch with Chiara, and Chiara had spoken of the two of us. And she said, they can be nothing other than a Focolare family. It was the first time that Chiara had used the term Focolare family, and she encouraged us to live with Jesus in the midst in the family.
I was working as an engineer, and I had built a beautiful house in the center of my city, Parma, setting aside an apartment for myself and another for my parents. But our relatives did not share our way of living. They didn't understand it. During the Mariapolis of 1956, full of extraordinary graces of light, Anna Maria and I decided not to go and live in the beautiful house which was now ready, so as to give ourselves more freely and totally to the newly born movement. It was like knocking down bridges with our relatives, a beautiful world, but the ideal God was stronger. The thought of leaving our country house, which was also close to our relatives, for an apartment we had found through Providence, brought tears to our eyes. But at a certain point, a thought came to us very forcefully. Now you are all mine, also, as a family.
During the Mariapolis
of 1959, Chiara asked us if we could move to Rome to look after the construction of the center of the movement at Rocca di Papa. I was in the midst of a great deal of work. The bishop had just appointed me president of a Catholic men's association, and I had been elected councilman of my city. Without hesitation, however, due to a grace, we left everything. When we were leaving, a Focolarina said to us, "You will receive the 100-fold," and so it was. During those years, our vocation as married poppi went through many hardships. The statutes were approved in 1962, but we married Focolarini were not included in them. A great suffering for everyone.
Chiara ci chiese di andare a esporre la nostra situazione.
Chiara asked us to present our situation to a scholarly Capuchin friar, an expert in canon law, who at that time had been appointed by the Church to follow the movement. Foco, Spartaco, and I went to him. For an hour we tried to present to him our way of reasoning, our considerations, our motivations. In the end, he told us that he understood our generosity, but that it was impossible to incorporate us as Focolarini in the statutes. They would have to change canon law. You can just imagine how we felt when we went back to Chiara. But Chiara, with her usual generosity and way of doing things, said to us, "Poppi, your vocation is written in heaven, not in canon law." And she let us listen, for the first time, to a tape of a talk she had given to the Focolarine on the Paradise of 1949. These are Chiara's methods. In June 1990, I accompanied Chiara to the Pontifical Council for the Laity. Cardinal Peronio, the president at that time, would hand over to Chiara the definitively approved statutes of the work of Mary, and in those statutes, we married Focolarini were included with full rights.
Danilo and Anna Maria really have given their life to the ideal of unity, to the Focolare movement, to Chiara. And along with Chiara, they understood that it was important to help other families form in a similar way in the ideal. And Chiara invited the families of the movement to the then very new mini-city of Lopiano to spend the time that they could manage, a few months or even a year, in living with other families, in sharing their experiences, and so that all of them would grow together. This experience came to be known as the Loreto School, or Scuola Loreto, named for the Holy Family and the little house in the Church of Loreto where Chiara felt the call to follow God. So we would like to share with you a strong experience of having gone through the Scuola Loreto. It was 15 years ago, and we went there as a family. We spent 10 months there. The invitation came at a time when we were questioning our very busy and committing career-driven lives and wondering whether things could be different. To go there, it meant leaving, in my case, or leaving in Ted's case rather, or taking a break in my case, from our jobs. But we did that, and along with Ria and Jairo, who are very small, we went to Lopiano, where Chiara's ideal was lived through the day, all the time, by the inhabitants. We lived with 10 families from 9 countries. And there were also 5 families who were called stable families, those who lived there and helped us all settle down. And not only that, they were a wonderful example of how we too could live the will of God in the present moment.
We worked for a livelihood, so we had to do very simple manual labor there. We had classroom time with talk with experts as well as sharing by the families who were attending the classes. Through this, we got to know a lot about the movement, the church, and family life. We also had plenty of time with our children. Our life was really full there because it was also very committing, but it was not rushed. We enjoyed nature as never before. And being part of this Cittadella of Lopiano, we met the other citizens as well. Some who were just transient, moving in and out, and the others who were resident, either at mass or at community gatherings or at different programs. The Jain volunteers, religious Focolarine, who were in formation, the other residents of Lopiano. We met many of the early Focolarini like Natalia, Marco, Chiaretto, and heard of their grace-filled stories. There was also a lot of joy and celebration in the many months that we were there. But there were also sufferings that came our way. When we faced difficult situations, God's presence was tangible around us. We experienced firsthand and regularly the meaning of giving one's life for another and being the first to love. We began to love the ideal of unity more deeply and were beginning to feel more committed towards it.
And yes, we grew. We really grew a lot there. We learned about detachment, providence, forgiveness, and love. Before going there, we were so used to being in control of things, but we learned to let go because we saw that through the simple lives we led there, God provided for all that we needed. We were also able to open our hearts and share our lives with the other families, understanding and appreciating each one's journey. And of course, through the best teachers, the children who are part of the school, we learned that language was not needed in order to get along, in order to make friends, in order to spread the joy and love.
And we soon realized that the time we spent with each other as a family was too precious to give up even on our return to India. The experience of Scuola Loreto helped our spiritual lives in a big way. It deepened our relationship with God, each other as a family, and also helped us in choices we made in the years that followed. More importantly, we learned to open ourselves to the will of God by saying yes to Him, even though we thought ourselves incapable at times. Our experience there helped us and continues to help us do things we never imagined were possible and offer our talents to others, especially families, like a relay of love.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nisha and Ted, for the presentation, but also your own experience